My daughter leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You deserve to live with homeless dogs." And everyone else just sat there like nothing had happened. That one sentence shattered everything I thought I knew about my own family. I'm 75 years old. I've lived a long life filled with giving, caring, and sacrificing. I cooked countless meals, stayed up late comforting crying children, helped them through sickness, heartbreak, and failure. I loaned money when they were struggling, gave advice when they felt lost, and loved them even when they made choices that broke my heart. And yet, sitting in that polished lawyer's office, surrounded by my daughter, my son, and their spouses, I realized how little all of it had meant to them. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon polish, the kind you use to cover up the scent of something older, something rotten. The bright lights above made the shiny wood table gleam almost painfully. My hands rested on my lap, clutching the folder I had brought with me. My fingers were trembling slightly, but I tried to steady them, pressing my thumbs into the folder's edge. Rachel, my daughter, sat directly across from me. She was perfectly composed, dressed sharply, makeup flawless, as if she had prepared for a business deal rather than her grandmother's while reading. She kept checking her phone, probably texting Glenn, her husband, who sat beside her. Glenn didn't even look up from his own screen, completely detached from the weight of the moment. My son David leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smirking like he was watching a performance. The lawyer began reading the will. His voice was calm, even, but the numbers he read were far larger than I expected. My mother had been frugal her whole life, but she had saved more than any of us realized. As the numbers came out, Rachel's eyes sparkled. She bit her bottom lip, probably to hide her growing smile. Her foot tapped quickly under the table like she couldn't wait for this to be over. I watched as she gave Glenn a small nod. They were already counting their share in their heads. Then came the sentence that shifted everything. "Mrs. Henderson, your portion of the inheritance is to be divided equally with your children," the lawyer announced. Rachel didn't even let him finish. She immediately leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, Mother," she said, drawing out my title like a joke. "Do you really need half? I mean, come on. What would you even do with it? You live so simply." Her words felt like a slap. My life had been simple because I made it that way for her. I skipped vacations so she could go to summer camps. I bought her school clothes instead of anything for myself. I worked extra hours to pay for her college. To her, my simplicity now meant I didn't deserve anything. My throat tightened. My chest burned. The words lodged there, heavy and painful, like a rock I couldn't swallow. Then she smiled wider, looked right at me, and said it. "You deserve to live with homeless dogs." I froze. My breath caught. My daughter, my child, whom I raised, fed, and protected, spoke those words like they were nothing. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't even angry. It was as if she believed what she was saying. My hands gripped the table so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest pounded. My ears rang. The room blurred slightly as I struggled to process her cruelty. I looked around the room, desperate for someone to defend me. Glenn didn't even glance up. He simply sipped his coffee, bored, like this was just another meeting. David avoided my eyes, pretending to study the wall. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing. No one spoke up. Not one of them had the courage to stop her. Rachel went on. "You're always taking care of those filthy stray animals. Maybe that's where you're most comfortable." Filthy, stray, homeless, useless. Each word she said added to the crushing weight on my chest. She wasn't just insulting me, she was erasing me. Erasing every sacrifice, every moment of love, every hardship I had faced to support her. I had cared for her children when she wanted to travel. I paid her rent when Glenn lost his job. I sat with her through nights when she cried about her marriage. I stayed strong for her when my own husband passed. And yet, All she saw now was someone standing in the way of her money. The lawyer quietly continued reading, but his words faded into a low hum. I could barely hear him. My mind was spinning, stuck on her words. Rachel crossed her legs and smiled, like she had already won. Glenn glanced at his watch. David kept scrolling through his phone. They were done with me. Their silence hurt even more than Rachel's words. Every time Rachel tapped her long, painted nails on the table, it felt like a hammer pounding into my heart. Every smirk, every sideways glance between her and Glenn was another reminder that they had stopped seeing me as family long ago. I was no longer a mother, a grandmother, or a person to them, just an obstacle. I remembered all the times I sat alone on holidays while they vacationed without me, the birthdays they forgot, the Mother's Days that passed with a simple text message, hours late. I remembered skipping meals to help pay for Rachel's wedding. I remembered using my savings to cover David's failed business loan. I remembered being there for every single one of them when they needed me. And this was my reward. The lawyer closed the folder softly. If there are no objections, we can proceed with the paperwork. I placed my hand on my folder. My fingers traced the edge as if searching for something solid to hold onto. I closed it slowly, letting the small click echo through the tense room. No, I said softly but clearly. There will be no need. Rachel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, Mother? I stood slowly. My legs trembled slightly, but I steadied them. Every part of my body felt heavy with years of exhaustion, but my mind was suddenly clear. I need some air, I said. Please continue without me. I turned and walked to the door. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something different, a quiet, growing strength. As I reached for the brass handle, I heard Rachel's whisper behind me, honestly, she's being so dramatic. David chuckled softly. Glenn muttered under his breath. None of them followed. None of them asked if I was okay. None of them cared. I walked into the hallway, the cool air hitting my flushed face. I kept walking out of the building, across the street, and into the small park I used to bring Rachel to when she was a little girl. I sat down on an old wooden bench under the oak tree. The same bench where I read her stories while she ran barefoot chasing butterflies. I thought those moments were building a lifetime bond. I thought they would carry us through any storm, but I was wrong. As I sat there, my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. My throat ached, my chest burned, but I swallowed it all down. I would not give them that satisfaction. Then I noticed a stray dog nearby, sniffing through a trash can. Its fur was matted, its ribs visible beneath its thin coat. Without hesitation, I reached into my purse and pulled out the sandwich I had packed for the meeting. I held it out. Come here, sweetheart, I whispered softly. The dog approached slowly, cautiously, its eyes full of suspicion but also hope. As it gently took the sandwich from my hand, its tail wagged slightly. I could feel its gratitude. In that simple moment, I received more appreciation from a hungry stray than I had from my own flesh and blood. My resentment didn't fade. It settled deeply inside me, cold but clear. For years, I had been their safety net, their servant, their silent helper. I had given and given until there was nothing left for me. And they had taken it all without ever once looking back to see if I was okay. Rachel's cruel words echoed again in my mind. You deserve to live with homeless dogs. Maybe I did, but not because I was worthless. Because at least the dogs appreciated kindness. They never mocked the hand that fed them. As I sat on that bench, something shifted inside me. A plan formed, quiet, simple, and final. No arguments. No screaming. No second chances. 3 days. That was all it would take. I reached down and gently stroked the dog's head. Its eyes closed as it leaned into my touch. Thank you, I whispered. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves overhead. And for the first time in many years, I smiled. They thought they had won. But they didn't know that the person they had walked all over was finally standing up. Quietly, calmly, with a plan that would change everything. When I opened my eyes that morning, the ceiling above me felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. I had lived in this house for years, yet after yesterday, everything seemed different. The air was heavy. My chest still carried the weight of Rachel's words, like sharp stones pressing against my ribs. You deserve to live with homeless dogs. The words played on a loop in my mind, cruel and steady. I sat up slowly, my body stiff from a restless night. The morning sun peeked through the curtains, but its light felt too bright, almost intrusive. The world outside carried on as if nothing had happened, but inside me, everything had shifted. I slipped my feet into my slippers and shuffled to the kitchen. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that filled the silence. On the kitchen table sat my usual breakfast, a piece of toast, a small cup of tea, and a slice of fruit. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the hollowness inside me grow. This table had seen years of life. I used to sit here with Rachel, feeding her oatmeal before school, braiding her hair while she giggled about her favorite cartoons. I had once taught David his multiplication tables here, sitting for hours until he finally understood. I had served birthday cakes, wiped away tears, and listened to teenage heartbreaks all around this table. Now it was just me, alone with my thoughts. I picked up my tea, but my hands trembled slightly, and I set the cup back down. The warmth of the tea couldn't reach the cold inside me. The betrayal from yesterday gnawed at my heart. Rachel's voice, sharp and cold, replayed again. Do you really need half? I mean, come on. What would you even do with it? You live so simply. As if my life had been simple by choice. She never saw the sacrifices. How I skipped vacations so she could attend summer camps. How I bought her school clothes while wearing worn shoes myself. How I worked late into the night to pay for her piano lessons, her college tuition, and her wedding. But in her eyes, my simplicity meant I had no need, no claim, no right. I could feel my stomach tighten with a mixture of grief and anger. It wasn't just the words, it was the ease with which she said them. The lack of hesitation. The absence of any flicker of guilt. Even more painful was the silence of everyone else in that room. Glenn didn't lift his eyes from his phone. He sat there, sipping his coffee, as if nothing out of the ordinary had been said. David leaned against the wall, arms crossed, pretending to admire the lawyer's diplomas. Not one of them spoke up. Not one offered a word of defense. I thought of Glenn's smirk, the way his lips curled ever so slightly when Rachel delivered her cruel words. I remembered David's forced yawn, as if he were bored, waiting for this formality to end. Their indifference cut deeper than any insult. After everything I had done for them, after every debt I had paid, every sleepless night spent worrying about them, they looked at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I stood up from the kitchen table and wandered into the living room. The walls were covered with framed photographs, snapshots of a family I thought I had built with love. Rachel as a child, beaming as she held her first puppy. David in his graduation robe, my hand resting proudly on his shoulder. Christmas mornings filled with laughter, birthdays marked by colorful balloons. Each picture now felt like a lie. I stared at one photo, Rachel's wedding day. She wore the gown I had paid for, standing under the arch I had helped decorate. I had drained my savings for that day. I wanted her to have the wedding she dreamed of, even though Glenn's family offered nothing. She never said thank you. Not once. The phone rang, breaking the suffocating silence. I didn't want to answer, but habit took over. I picked up the receiver and saw her name flashing on the screen. Rachel. I inhaled deeply and pressed the button. Hello, I said, keeping my voice steady. Mother, she began with false cheer. I just wanted to check in. You seemed upset yesterday. I hope you're feeling better. Feeling better? After being humiliated in front of my own children? I'm fine, I answered quietly. She continued without pause. Glenn and I were talking, and we think it might be best for everyone if you just sign over your portion. David agrees. We'll handle everything. It'll be less stressful for you. Less stressful for me. The manipulation was smooth, calculated. She framed it as a favor to me, a way to help. She didn't care about my well-being. She cared about getting what she wanted, and faster. I'll think about it, I replied, forcing myself to stay calm. Of course, Mother, she said sweetly. We just want you to be comfortable. Comfortable. If she had truly cared about my comfort, she wouldn't have allowed me to sit alone for so many holidays. She wouldn't have canceled visits last minute. She wouldn't have let my phone calls go unanswered for days. I hung up and sat back down, staring at nothing. The resentment inside me didn't feel like fire anymore. It was colder now. Heavier. More solid. A message from David followed shortly after. Hey, Mom. Rachel said you might need help with the paperwork. Glenn knows a great lawyer who can make this easy for everyone. Easy for everyone. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted. They were moving forward as if my consent was a formality, as if I were incapable of making decisions for myself. After all the times I bailed them out, covered their mistakes, and picked them up when they fell, they now wanted to push me aside. I didn't respond to David's message. The silence felt good. I walked to my bedroom and opened the small wooden box on my nightstand. Inside were old letters from my mother, carefully folded and yellowed with age. I read her handwriting, delicate but firm. Always stand tall, even when others try to make you small. She had lived through hard times, but she never let anyone steal her dignity. I realized that somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that lesson. I had allowed them to shrink me. I wouldn't let it continue. I returned to the living room and looked again at the wall of family photos. Each image was a painful reminder of my sacrifices and their growing ingratitude. My eyes landed on one final photograph, Rachel as a child, standing beside a stray dog we had rescued together. Back then, she loved animals. She begged me to let her keep that dog, and I had said yes even though money was tight. I smiled softly at the memory, but the warmth quickly faded. That little girl was gone. As I stared out the window, I noticed the same stray dog from yesterday roaming near the park. Its ribs still showed beneath its dirty fur, but it wagged its tail slightly as it sniffed the grass. Watching it, I felt a strange sense of connection. It, too, had been discarded. Unwanted. Yet when I had offered it food the day before, it had looked at me with something my own children hadn't shown in years. Gratitude. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Rachel. Just checking in, Mother. We're scheduling the meeting with the lawyer for next week. Let us know when you're ready to sign. Love you. Love you. The words rang hollow. They weren't love. They were control. I took a deep breath and stood up. I walked over to my desk and pulled out my mother's old address book. The pages were thin, worn from years of use. My eyes scanned the familiar names until I found what I was looking for. Second Chance Animal Shelter. My mother had donated to them for years. She believed in helping those who couldn't help themselves. I had carried on that habit quietly, feeding the strays in my neighborhood, donating small amounts when I could. But now I saw something else, an opportunity to finally make my voice heard. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before a kind voice answered. Second Chance Animal Shelter. How may I help you? Hello, I said softly. My name is Margaret Henderson. I would like to speak with someone about making a significant donation. The woman on the other end paused, surprised. Of course, Mrs. Henderson. We would be honored. I can schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. Tomorrow, I replied. Tomorrow would be perfect. As I hung up the phone, a calmness settled over me. The storm inside me had passed. What remained was a steady resolve. They thought I would give in, that I would surrender like I always had. But not this time. I walked back to the window and watched as the stray dog laid down under a tree, finally resting. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting soft shadows on the ground. I would no longer allow myself to be treated like that stray, only noticed when it was convenient, discarded when it was not. 3 days. That was all I needed. I gently whispered to the dog outside, though it couldn't hear me. Thank you. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The silence didn't frighten me anymore. In fact, I welcomed it. For so many years, my home had been filled with noise, ringing phones, demanding voices, urgent requests. But after I unplugged my phone, after I made my choice, it was quiet. And in that quiet, I could finally breathe. I stood by the window, looking out at the pale morning sky. The world outside carried on as usual. But inside, everything had shifted. It was strange how quickly resentment could turn into clarity once the noise stopped. Their voices no longer filled my head. Rachel's cutting words, David's false concern, Glenn's smug indifference, all of it faded into the background like static. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring its warmth. Today was the day I would finalize everything. The paperwork was ready. My appointment at Second Chance Animal Shelter was scheduled. I dressed carefully, as though preparing for something sacred. My navy blue sweater hugged my frame, bringing me quiet comfort. My scarf rested gently around my shoulders. My handbag, with the documents tucked neatly inside, hung on my arm. I was steady, unshaken. The air was crisp as I stepped outside. Across the street, the same stray dog lay beneath the old oak tree. Its ribs still showed, but its eyes remained bright. I whispered softly to it, soon. The drive to the shelter felt shorter than I remembered. The roads were quiet, the early morning shielding me from the usual distractions. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need to fill the silence anymore. Inside the shelter, I was greeted with warm smiles. Linda, the director, welcomed me into her small office with gentle kindness. "Mrs. Henderson," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for seeing me," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. She glanced at the stack of documents I laid on her desk. "Are you certain you want to do this?" "It's a large portion of your inheritance." I nodded without hesitation. "I've never been more certain. My family, they've shown me where their hearts are. This will do more good here than it ever would with them." Linda said nothing for a moment, studying my face. She could see it, the years of giving, the years of being taken for granted. And then I signed. With every stroke of my pen, I felt lighter. My hand no longer trembled. My breathing was steady. As I placed the final signature, I felt something that had eluded me for decades. Freedom. When I left the shelter, the cold wind stung my cheeks, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I was alive, capable, and, finally, in control. Back at home, the silence greeted me again. But it wasn't empty. It was full of peace. Hours passed before my phone lit up. "Rachel." I let it ring. Then came the text. "Mother, please call me. We need to finalize the details with the lawyer." Then David. "Hey, Mom. Let us know when you're ready to meet with Glenn's lawyer. Better to handle this sooner than later." Sooner than later. Because they were eager. They believed I would surrender, like always. But not this time. I placed the phone back on the counter and poured another cup of tea. My hand was steady. My resolve was firm. The next morning, without warning, Rachel appeared at my door. I watched her approach through the lace curtain, her steps quick, her shoulders stiff, her face locked in that polite smile she always wore when she wanted something. I opened the door, but only slightly. I didn't invite her in. "Mother," she began, her tone rehearsed, "I stopped by because you haven't been returning my calls." "I've been busy," I replied calmly. She forced a laugh. "I understand all of this can be overwhelming. That's why Glenn and I want to help. David, too. We just want to make sure everything is handled properly so you don't have to worry." "Handled properly. Thank you for your concern," I answered. "But I can manage my affairs." A flicker of irritation crossed her face, but she caught herself quickly. "Mother, let's be realistic. Managing such a large inheritance at your age can be confusing. That's why Glenn's lawyer is ready to assist. There it was, the condescension, the assumption of my incompetence. As if my years of sacrifice and management of their crises meant nothing. I kept my voice steady. I appreciate the offer, but I've already made other arrangements. Her eyebrows arched. Arrangements? Yes, with people who respect my wishes. The first rail crack appeared in her polished mask. Her lips tightened, her eyes darkened. Mother, she said through clenched teeth, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've always wanted us to be secure. We're simply ensuring that. As she spoke, a long-buried memory surged forward. I was 17 again, standing outside my childhood home in the dark, clutching a small suitcase. My father's voice still rang in my ears. If you want to live your own life, then leave. The door had slammed shut behind me. I'd spent weeks sleeping on a friend's couch before my mother, trembling, snuck me back in when my father wasn't home. Back then, I convinced myself this was normal. That family meant enduring such treatment. Now, looking into my daughter's face, I recognized the same cold entitlement. The same dismissal. The cycle had repeated. But this time, I wouldn't remain silent. Rachel, I said softly but firmly, I used to believe love meant giving everything until there was nothing left. I believed that if I kept sacrificing, you would show me love in return. But I see now you only value what I can give you. Her face reddened. That's not true. You're being unfair. I shook my head gently. No. For the first time, I'm being honest. She tried once more to regain control, but I didn't let her. You're making a terrible mistake, she whispered coldly. No, Rachel, I said. You made the mistake when you assumed I would never stand up for myself. And with that, I closed the door. She remained standing on the porch for a moment, likely shocked, before finally walking away. The days that followed were filled with a different kind of silence, not empty, but peaceful. The lawyer from the shelter called to confirm everything was officially processed. The inheritance was secured for those who truly needed it. But Rachel and David still didn't know. Their messages continued, layered with growing desperation disguised as concern. Mother, we're worried about legal complications. Mom, delaying could create tax issues. We're trying to protect you. Protect me. They had never protected me when I sat alone on holidays. When my lights were shut off because I paid their bills. When I missed my doctor appointments to watch their children. Their protection was always for themselves. One evening, David showed up unannounced. His knock was softer than Rachel's, his posture more cautious. Hey, Mom, he said quietly. Can we talk? I hesitated but let him in. He sat on the edge of the couch, glancing around as though he barely recognized the home he grew up in. Look, he started, I know Rachel came off a little harsh. She gets anxious about this stuff. We both do. It's a lot of money, Mom. It is, I agreed calmly. We just don't want you to get taken advantage of. Financial decisions can get tricky at your age. Tricky for whom? David, I said, locking eyes with him. Who paid off your business loans when your company failed? He shifted uncomfortably. You did. Who covered Rachel's mortgage when Glenn was out of work? You did. Who watched your children when you and Rachel needed vacations? Who skipped medical appointments to babysit? Who drained her own savings to make sure you were secure? He said nothing. I did, David. Out of love. Never expecting repayment. But when I finally have something left for myself, you both treat me like an obstacle. We're grateful, Mom. We are. We just don't want you to make a decision you might regret. I smiled sadly. The only thing I regret is allowing myself to be treated this way for so long. He stood abruptly, his frustration visible. You're being manipulated, Mom. You're going to regret this. No, I whispered. For the first time, I won't. As I closed the door behind him, the weight that had sat on my chest for years finally lifted. 3 days had passed since I signed the papers. I walked to my window and saw the stray dog resting peacefully beneath the oak tree. I stepped outside and approached it with a small bowl of food. As I placed the bowl down, the dog lifted its head and wagged its tail, eyes soft with trust. "You and I whispered, we understand each other." The dog ate gratefully, its simple gratitude warming me in a way my children hadn't for years. The wind stirred gently through the trees, and for the first time in my life, I stood fully free, no longer the servant to anyone's expectations but my own. It didn't take long for the panic to begin. The silence that followed my decision had lulled me into a brief moment of peace, but I knew it wouldn't last. I had anticipated the moment they would find out. Still, when it arrived, the weight of it settled heavily in the pit of my stomach. It started with a phone call, not from Rachel or David, but from Glenn. His voice was unusually tense, stripped of the practiced politeness he often used. "Margaret, we need to talk." I could almost hear him grinding his teeth through the phone. "There's been a development with the inheritance. We need you to come in to meet with the lawyer immediately." I didn't answer right away. My hand trembled slightly as I held the phone, but not from fear, from the steady awareness of what was coming. "I'm not meeting with your lawyer, Glenn," I said calmly. There was a pause. Then his tone sharpened. "Margaret, you don't understand what's happening. You may have made some unwise decisions that could cause legal complications for everyone." Unwise decisions. Those were the words he used to describe me choosing not to hand over my life's worth to them. As if my only role was to give until there was nothing left. "Everything has been handled," I replied evenly. "There's no need for further discussion." I ended the call before he could respond. My heart pounded as I set the phone down, but alongside the adrenaline was something else, relief. I had finally broken free of their grasp. Within an hour, Rachel called. Her voice carried none of the fake sweetness she had always masked her demands with. "Mother, what did you do?" she snapped. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. "I made arrangements that reflect my wishes." "You went behind our backs," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I followed the law. I honored my mother's legacy. And I honored my own dignity." "You're being selfish," she shouted. "You always preached about family and loyalty, and now you're throwing it all away for some animals." The words hit me hard, but not for the reason she intended. It was her complete inability to see the truth that stung the most. Selfish. After everything I had given. After every sleepless night spent worrying about them, every dollar handed over without question, every sacrifice I had quietly made. "I was never selfish, Rachel," I said softly. "But I'm done being used." She went silent for a moment, then her voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "You'll regret this, Mother. You've destroyed everything." "No," I whispered. "I've finally reclaimed something." The call ended, and so did the illusion of civility between us. The anger from them escalated quickly. The messages came pouring in, filled with frustration and venom. "How could you be so cruel?" Rachel texted. "We trusted you." David's message was sharper. "You've betrayed your own children for animals. You're not the mother we thought you were." Glenn's messages were more threatening. "This isn't over, Margaret. We have legal options. If you think you can just cut us out, you're wrong." Their fury was no longer hidden behind polite language. It boiled over into full rage, their entitlement exposed completely. A few days later, they arrived together at my house. Rachel, David, Glenn, and even my grandchildren all packed into 2 cars. I watched them through my window. Rachel paced back and forth, David whispered angrily to Glenn, and Glenn glared at my front door as though his stare alone would force it open. The knock on the door was sharp, fast, demanding. When I opened it, their faces were tight with anger. "Mother," Rachel started, barely containing herself, "you've gone too far. You are tearing this family apart." I stood calmly. "I've simply chosen to stop being taken advantage of." David stepped forward. "We have rights, Mom. You can't just disinherit your children like this." I followed every legal step. I said firmly. This was my choice. Glenn's voice cut in, his patience gone. You've made a huge mistake, Margaret. You think these shelters care about you? They're just using you. At least we're your family. Family, I repeated softly. Where was this family when I sat alone on holidays? Where was this family when you needed my money, my time, but never once asked how I was feeling? Rachel's face was flushed with rage. Don't you dare throw that in our faces. We have our own lives. You were supposed to be our mother, to help us, to support us. That's what parents do. I did support you, I answered. And you repaid me with indifference. My grandchildren stood silently, awkward and uncomfortable. They had barely visited me over the years, but now stood behind their parents as if summoned for backup. Glenn stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. You think you're teaching us some kind of lesson? You're just bitter and spiteful. And when you're gone, all that money will be wasted. I felt my heart pounding, but I remained calm. It won't be wasted. It will finally go where it's appreciated. We're not done here, Glenn snapped. If you think this is over, you're wrong. Then do what you feel you must, I said and closed the door. But the most unexpected thing happened a week later. I received a letter, not from Rachel, not from David, but from my granddaughter Emily. She had always been quiet, distant like the others, following her parents' lead. But her letter was different. Grandma, I know things have been hard. I never realized how much you sacrificed until I heard everything that's happened. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you before. I see now how unfair it's been. I hope one day we can sit together again. Love, Emily. Tears filled my eyes as I read her words. Perhaps not everything was lost. Perhaps one branch of the family tree could still grow straight. As I looked out my window that evening, the stray dog still rested under the oak tree. I walked outside with a bowl of food, knelt beside it, and whispered, You and I, we understand loyalty. Real loyalty. The dog wagged its tail as the wind rustled through the trees. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something gentle stir inside me, hope. The storm didn't stop overnight. Even after their visit and the countless angry calls, my children's desperation continued to grow. It seemed the more they realized the inheritance was truly out of their reach, the more vicious their words became. That morning, I opened my email to find a message from Rachel. The subject line read, One last chance. Her words were laced with a venom she no longer bothered to hide. Mother, you are humiliating this family. Do you really think anyone respects you for what you've done? You've embarrassed us in front of friends, relatives, and even the community. People are talking. You should be ashamed of yourself. Ashamed. That word cut sharply. It was the very weapon they had used against me for years. Every time I voiced my own needs, they accused me of being difficult, dramatic, selfish. Now, because I had finally chosen myself, they were trying one last time to drag me back into their web. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening, but alongside the old hurt was something stronger. A clarity that had grown inside me since the day I signed the papers. For decades, I allowed them to define my worth. I was useful when they needed help. I was invisible when I asked for love. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, David called. I didn't pick up, but I listened to his voicemail. Mom, please. Rachel's a mess. Glenn's talking about legal action. This doesn't have to go this way. We can still fix this if you just reverse what you did. We're your family. You raised us better than this. That last sentence burned. I had raised them better. I had taught them to work hard, to respect others, to be kind. And yet, somewhere along the way, they learned entitlement instead of gratitude. They learned to take, not to give. Their version of family only worked if I remained small, silent, and endlessly giving. And when I broke that pattern, it shattered their entire world. Even Glenn's tone shifted from anger to veiled threats in his messages. Margaret, you're putting yourself in a dangerous legal position. Don't underestimate the consequences of what you've done. This could get ugly. You're not thinking clearly. They always fell back on the same accusation, that I was incapable, that I didn't understand. But I understood better than anyone. I remembered every bill I had paid for them, every sleepless night I spent worrying about their futures, every holiday dinner I sat through alone while they celebrated elsewhere. I remembered Rachel's words in the lawyer's office, "You deserve to live with homeless dogs." And yet, it was the stray dog outside my home that had offered me more comfort than my own children. The days stretched on. Their anger turned to silence, as if they were regrouping, planning new strategies. But something shifted unexpectedly. A small envelope arrived by mail. Inside was another letter from Emily. "Grandma, I spoke to Mom and Uncle David. They don't understand what they've done to you. But I do. I've been thinking about all the times I stayed silent because I didn't want to upset anyone. I realize now that was wrong. You deserved better. If you're open to it, I'd like to visit. Just to talk. I miss you." As I read her words, my throat tightened and tears blurred my vision. There it was. A flicker of something I thought I had lost completely. Connection. Emily wasn't trying to manipulate me. She wasn't begging for money or accusing me of betrayal. She simply wanted to talk. That evening, when she arrived, I opened the door and, for the first time in months, allowed someone inside. She looked nervous, holding a small bag of groceries. "I thought we could have tea," she said softly. I smiled. "I'd like that." As we sat together, the years seemed to fall away. She listened as I spoke, really listened. Not once did she interrupt or defend her parents. She allowed me to share the pain I had carried for so long. "Grandma," she whispered after a long pause, "I never realized how much you gave up for them. For us. I was too blind to see it. You were young," I said gently. "It wasn't your burden to carry." She reached across the table, taking my hand. "You're not alone anymore," she said. "Not with me." That simple sentence broke something inside me, not in pain, but in relief. In Emily, I saw what could have been. What still could be. Days turned into weeks. Rachel and David continued their crusade behind the scenes. Rumors spread among extended family and neighbors. There were whispers at church, sideways glances in the grocery store. The pressure mounted, but I held firm. One Sunday morning, I attended service alone as I had many times before. But this time, I didn't sit quietly in the back. When the service ended, several neighbors approached. One woman, Mrs. Patterson, leaned in and said gently, "Margaret, I heard what your children are saying. I just want you to know, you did nothing wrong. You finally stood up for yourself." Her words felt like a warm embrace. Others nodded, offering kind smiles and soft touches on my arm. They weren't judging me. They were admiring my courage. Rachel and David had tried to turn public opinion against me, but instead, they exposed themselves. People could see their greed clearly now. And then came the final attempt. A formal letter arrived from Glenn's attorney. A last-ditch effort to intimidate me into submission. Words like contest, dispute, and potential litigation filled the page. I read it carefully, folded it neatly, and placed it inside my desk drawer. They didn't scare me anymore. A week later, Emily visited again. "Grandma," she said, her voice filled with quiet excitement, "I've been thinking. I want to volunteer at the shelter. The one you donated to. I want to help." I smiled through tears. "You have no idea what that means to me, sweetheart." And then she added something that pierced my heart in the most beautiful way. "I don't want to be like them. I want to learn from you instead." That night, as I sat by the window with my cup of tea, I watched the stray dog curl up beneath the oak tree. The wind rustled through the branches, whispering through the silence. I had lost my children, but I had found something far greater, my voice, my dignity, and perhaps even a second chance to build something new. The pain would always be there, the years I could never get back, the love I had poured into people who never valued it. But as the stars blinked softly above, I whispered to myself, I won't be afraid to tell the truth anymore, even if it hurts. And if you've ever felt like you don't belong, you're not alone. This is not the end. It's a beginning.